board members, if we can get you to take your seat, we're going to get started. Apologize that we're a little bit late. Want to welcome everyone to our study session today. Got a few board members. I think we've got some coming online, and board member Scott Nielsen's at his brother's graduation this morning. Want to excuse him. And board member Belknap's got a kind of little family emergency thing she's helping with, and I'm not sure if she'll be online. We'll over the wire. We'll see who comes on board. But I appreciate board members that you guys are here today. We've got before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about on the kind of the safety side of things. We try to do this in our meetings, and chairs, be sure and do it in your other task force, or not your task force, in your committee meetings. So for safety and that, exit the building, go out these doors here. You can go north or south and get right out in that nice, beautiful day. I'm not sure if we'll have a building evacuation or not, but in the case we do, that's how you get out of here. My understanding on the restrooms that they are working, but just not this one. You have to, the elevator works, and there's stairs here up and downstairs. So there we go. We should be good. We should be good. Want to recognize our highway patrolman back there that helps us with our safety and that. Appreciate the work that he does for us. And out on the road, Officer Bricker, right? Got it. Thank you. If you get lost in here, somebody will help you find your way. But appreciate you being here. Okay, we are excited. I'm excited for our study session. And I think I'll have the superintendent introduce it, and away we go. Well,
I'm over on this one, as I can't.
Okay, there you go.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, board members. I am so thrilled that we're having this study session today. One of your 4 goals in the strategic plan is personalized learning, and I am so proud of you for taking on this goal, because this is the place where it is our space for thinking about innovation and being a more nimble system and being very student-centered in the way we approach education. So today, we're coming forward to present to you our efforts around competency-based education as part of that, and where it fits into the broader scope of personalized learning. And I'm really pleased that we have some local examples of leaders who are also in this space trying to forge their path of being more student-centered and working through outcomes for students based on a more personalized approach. And that's through competency-based education. So nobody's really getting this perfect or quite right out in the field yet across the country. We've been watching a couple of other states. New Hampshire comes to mind in that they stepped into this early on. But we find that nobody has it quite right, and so it's an opportunity for us to lead and to really be innovative. So today we're not coming to you to say, hey, we have this perfected and look at what these LEAs are doing, but to say we have some really brave people out in the field who are very focused in a different way on students, and they've done some things that seem to be making a difference based on what we're seeing in outcomes and the interviews that we're having, that I'm having personally, when I go out on visits and talk to students and teachers. And parents are coming along. They're an important part of this as well. So today we're going to talk about those things, and we'll ask Sarah Young and Todd Call to come to the table. And these are 2 leaders in the field. Sarah has become our implementation coach, but I'll tell you, Todd and Sarah both are so well respected, and they are just our Energizer bunnies around this work. They are on fire, and I'm so pleased that we have them here in the office. So these 2 rock stars will start us out and then turn the time over to our great local rock stars. So Sarah and Todd.
Okay, before I turn this on, board members, just and I've had the opportunity to talk to Sarah earlier this morning. What we'd like to do is get through this presentation, and we also have some guests here, and there's going to be some questions I call them kind of like the big rock questions. And then we'll get to the point for board comments and questions. So through the presentation, if you take note and inventory of any concerns or questions that you have, there will be an opportunity. But with this presentation, and Sarah, is this the format you want? Let's kind of get through it and then get into then have a dialogue. Okay.
Thank you. So Sarah Young, implementation coach here at the Utah State Board of Education. Just a bit of context, my time with the work stems all the way back to 2017 when legislation was released specific to charging this office with the creation of a competency-based learning pilot. So I'm going to be speaking to many of the historical aspects of the work here today, as well as my colleague, who I'll let introduce himself.
Good morning. I'm Todd Call, Digital Teaching and Learning Coordinator here for the Utah State Board of Education, and excited to share some thoughts on some of the great things happening around the state around competency and personalized learning.
So our structure for today's agenda, we're really looking to hit on some of the key topics to be able to help board members understand the context in which we're working with competency-based learning by addressing the need, what are some things that are happening in the field that really prompt this work, the research base, and we have some learning tasks associated with that research base so that you can kind of engage with your fellow board members. We will also touch on the history of what's been happening here in the state related to competency leading up to the presentation today, and then move towards the future and what the efforts that we as staff are embarking in to be able to improve and iterate on this work. Finally, we will end with some local innovation leaders that we have here from Juab School District, Davis School District, and Weber School District to be able to talk more about their local experiences with competency-based learning.
So all of us in the room are familiar, at least at some level, with the idea of personalized learning. In fact, as Superintendent Dixon mentioned, personalized teaching and learning is one of the 4 goals of the board's strategic plan. This goal, as noted here in the slide, specifically states that each student and educator has access to personalized teaching and learning experiences. So what exactly is personalized learning? There are a lot of different definitions. The Competency Works organization says that in general, personalized learning means to tailor learning to students' strengths, needs, interests, and experiences. And personalized learning has really become a critical element of most next generation learning models. There are many different ways that educators and schools can personalize education. It begins with teachers building respectful relationships with their students around their learning goals. It also requires some type of customized learning plan and planning process, which might include data on student skills, interest surveys, career and college exploration options, projected learning trajectories, and reflections to develop metacognition so students can better understand themselves as learners. Students may also have access to varied content, learning environments, or experiences to help create personalized pathways for learning based on students and their interest. So we're excited today to have the opportunity to have a conversation around competency-based education and how efforts happening around the state in regards to competency are helping support and inform this larger vision of personalized teaching and learning.
So one of the key questions that we're often asked here at the State Board of Education, and I'm sure you will start to be in the field, is when you say competency-based learning, what do you mean? Like, what is that definition? And so we are fortunate here at the state of Utah that it's actually in our code associated with the Competency-Based Learning Pilot. And I've placed that code up on the screen in regards to the 5 elements that really define competency-based education here in the state of Utah. The first one being that competency-based education is based on the student advancement upon mastery of a concept or skill. So that really gets into the changes challenges associated with pacing and how we've traditionally approached education as a system. The second key element is that the competencies include explicit, measurable, and transferable learning objectives that empower a student. Really getting to that core idea of what are our expectations for competency and making sure that that's not something that's discussed by the adults, but is really enhanced and taken over as a directive by the students themselves. Third is that the assessment is meaningful and provides a positive learning experience for students. This is a key shift from some earlier conversations that happened in the state 10 to 15 years ago around competency, where competency was oftentimes, could you complete a packet or could you take a multiple choice test? And so really looking at, no, we want those assessments to be greater than that, to emphasize not just content knowledge, but skills, as well as a mastery and depth of knowledge associated in those areas. Fourth is timely differentiated support on a student's individual learning needs. Again, I think sometimes competency gets maybe conflated with students advancing quickly, and that's the key role, is to be able to help students, work their way through education at a faster pace. When truly competency is based on providing those interventions that we know are necessary for students so that they can be successful in their advancement of coursework and opportunities. Last but not least would be learning outcomes that emphasize competencies that include application and creation of knowledge. So really, again, focusing on the fact that we're looking at a more in-depth mastery of the subject areas as opposed to just a surface level understanding. So what is the need associated with competency?
Did someone join us?
Oh, hi, Chair Hensman. Yes, Lisa Cummins is on the phone. If you could let me know when I can ask questions, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. It will be more towards the conclusion of the presentation, so thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So Go ahead, Chair. So in regards to the need associated with competency, for a moment, I'd like you to consider the traditional transcript. So this is used by over 99% of our K-12 institutions, not just here in Utah, but across the United States. And some of the challenges of that transcript. So the transcript is almost 90 years old in regards to being created in the industrial era, really looking at how are we going to quickly categorize the learning experiences that have happened for our students to make it so that it's easily interpreted for future advancements, such as moving into a technical college or a four-year university. It really focuses on an acquisition of information, not necessarily the process that went into that. So you're familiar with a transcript in regards to it lists your course and it lists your grade. It doesn't necessarily list the process and the timing and the products that you presented in evidence towards that final outcome. It also speaks to the fact that grades are replicable and validated and meaningful across different educational environments. And so an A in one space should be, for all intensive purposes, an A at another school with a different teacher. And we don't necessarily have data to support that in regards equitable learning experiences in every environment to be represented by a single grade that's transferable. It also doesn't get into a lot of the cognitive skills and character traits, such as things that we presented in the portrait of a graduate yesterday. Those aren't represented in a traditional transcript model. It does encourage separation of disciplines as well. So looking at proficiencies related to science, math, English language arts, when we know that those content areas and experiences are really integrated in the real world that our students experience. It does really in many cases, lead our students to value that extrinsic motivation. So instead of viewing it as this is a learning process and I'm engaged in that process, it's more associated with how do I get the grade? It's a conversation we hear from a lot of our secondary teachers that many of our students are less about, I need to have a better understanding of this concept, or I need to better develop my skill set here, as opposed to how do I improve my grade? And that's the key conversation that oftentimes occurs when we have that transcript level outcome. Last but not least, it also gets challenging to distinguish performance between students. And we're going to highlight that here for you in a minute with a little example and case study. So to give you a better sense of what does this look like in real life, we have two kind of dilemmas for you to consider. So here's dilemma number one, and the question is really broad. Who's learning? So in this particular graphic, we're representing 3 different students who are beginning 5th grade. You will note that one starts at a 3rd grade level, and then 2 are starting at different levels within 5th grade. We'd like to give you 5 minutes to be able to turn and talk with your fellow board members about the following questions. 1, who's learned the most this year? And who's learned the least? Second, to consider who is most likely to be referenced as the fast learner. Third, with whom did the most effective teaching likely happen? And last, we'd encourage you to consider what grades do you expect to see on the report cards, and how does that impact a student's motivation? So this is a turn and talk moment, as we tend to do in education. We'd like to give you the opportunity to discuss this scenario with your board members for 5 minutes.
Are there some questions that I may ask, or am I on mute right now?
Sorry. We're not taking questions. There's this a little collaboration. We got asked 1, 2, 3, 4 questions to deliberate with another board member. And so we're not to that point yet. So hang on.
If you'd like to take 30 seconds to wrap up your conversations.
Maybe, I don't know, as a student, that looks good for a reason. If you've been given something maybe different than someone else, then you're there to help others. So I'm fine with them helping, but they also should be able to know their learning. It shouldn't be only helping. It should be helping and
Okay, if you want to take just 5 seconds to wrap up where you are.
We will never wrap it up.
Oh, you will
until
never wrap. So the robust discussions are really valuable, and hopefully in that turn and talk with your fellow board members, you realize that there are a lot of these questions where there's not necessarily a single answer, but that question actually begs additional questions in regards to the type of learning environment, more details about the student, then as well what opportunities exist in the system to support each of those students individually. So the second dilemma we're going to present, because that was an elementary example, is a secondary example. And in this case, we're going to kind of talk you through the dilemma. So I appreciate it's a little small on the screen, so you should have this in your backup, but I'll kind of walk you through. There are 3 students who receive an 80% as their final course grade. You'll see with student 1, when it's looking at the individual standard assessments, they received 80% across the board in every single assessment. Student 2 demonstrates that they actually have 100% in regards to their assessments on standards 4 through 8, but received a 40% on standards 1 and 2 and a 60% on standard 3. Student 3 is going to show that they had 91% in the later standards, but we're ranging between 40% and 70% from the standards 1 through 4. Yet and in that particular case, we also break it down in regards to an assessment average of only 66%. However, their homework, attendance, behavior, and effort grades were at 100%, leading to an overall grade of 80%. When you're looking at these 3 students, consider the following. Which student is the most or least prepared for the next grade level? What does a final grade of 80% in student 1's courses mean? Versus what does a final grade of 80% mean in student 3's courses? So these are items that we beg you to consider. We're not going to have you do a turn and talk at this moment, but we're presenting it to emphasize that these are questions that exist with the use of the current transcript and grading system, and really demonstrate the need associated with how can we provide more clarity around student learning associated with truly supporting personalizing learning for each student. So in regards to some competency-based education research, we want to highlight that this research actually comes from our partners with Education Elements. They came and did a presentation for our Exploratory Pilot, LEAs, in September of 2018. And in that space, presented this to members of the field who were early innovators associated with the Utah effort. When we talk about the research, we're going to highlight 3 kind of key studies. There is much more research beyond these 3, but we think it emphasizes some key elements as to what we're using to inform competency-based learning moving forward. The first one's going to be our experimental study, which is Bloom back in 1984. So in this particular study, they took 3 groups of students across multiple grade levels, and they provided one with a traditional classroom experience, one instructor to 30 kids, and being able to provide an assessment opportunity for outcomes at the end. The second group, they had more small group learning, and they also introduced the role of formative assessments in the middle of the study to be able to inform teacher education associated with changing the instruction. In the last group, we had individual tutoring on a 1-to-1 or 1-to-3 student space, as well as having the formative assessment. So you'll see in regards to achievement, and this was measured across grade levels, that the traditional setting achievement bell curve is significantly lower than those who experienced the mastery learning, where the formative assessment was in place with smaller groups, with individual tutoring clearly being in the highest space. So that really emphasized a couple of key pieces. More students had cognitive prerequisites for each new learning task in those mastery and individual tutoring models. Students became more positive about their ability to learn in the subject, observed by the researchers and measured. And then last but not least, the mastery students put in more active learning time than the control students did in the traditional setting. The second piece we wanted to highlight is a learning science component. And this is one where we differentiate between your long-term memory and your working memory. So how many board members have potentially seen the Disney movie Inside Out? A few of us, not everyone. I highly recommend it if you have not. It's a Pixar classic. So in regards to Inside Out, it's basically an animation of what does your brain science look like in regards to both your working memory, your long-term memory, and how that's stored. It's important to note, whether you've seen the film or not, that your working memory is going to be memory that is readily accessible to you and that you have a limited number of spots in your working memory. It's not an endless library. Whereas your long-term memory is going to be stored over time and is something that you can draw back upon and recall, but it's not going to be there at the forefront. Usually there are those moments where you have to think about it for a minute and then say, oh yeah, okay, and make that connection. So for this one, we're going to ask the board members to engage in a little learning activity. So we're going to give you 10 seconds to memorize the letters I'm about to put on the screen. Then we're going to ask you to turn to a board member and tell them what letters you are able to remember. You will have 10 seconds. I know, so this is sometimes how we feel in assessment. Okay, ready, go. Okay, turn and talk and tell your partner what you remember. Okay, I'm going to quickly put it back on the screen so you can effectively grade each other. All right, so generally speaking, this is a really challenging space. Most people usually can remember between 4 to 7 letters. Usually 4 is the key number because they're chunked into at least that first one with 4 settings. So you're more likely to remember a small chunk than you are to remember the whole strand. So let's try it again. You're going to have the same 10 seconds, and we're going to ask you to memorize the exact same letters, but I'm going to present them slightly differently. So here we go, 10 seconds. Okay, so now turn and tell your partner what you remember.
That's pretty cool.
Okay. So, how many board members were able to remember more letters in the second setting than you were in the first? Okay, so it's pretty universal that that is the case. So why is that? Well, so it's basically associated with chunking in regards to being able to present the information in a format that allows you to connect it with pre-existing knowledge or a scheme associated with understanding what those letters are. So taking something very abstract and connecting it to a prior experience is really important in regards to effective learning and translating that learning from being something that you have in your working memory but never translates to long-term into that long-term space. Now, I'll tell you what's interesting about this is it's based on your prior experiences, though, and recognizing that different individuals are going to have a different scheme in which they're applying. I went to high school with a friend who they didn't have a TV in their household. And as a part of that, this scheme would not have worked for him any better than the original presentation. So when we're talking about competency and personalized learning, it's important to recognize that that scheme really exists at the student level, not at an overall, we can expect every kid to have the same set of experiences. So in regards to informing competency, it's really that challenge in the current system of it's time to move on. I can tell you that if I left that first list of letters up there every single day at the start of your day, you woke up and you saw that set of letters, you would eventually memorize them. It's kind of the way that we remember phone numbers and other abstract sets of numbers because we interact with them quite a bit. However, in our current school system, we have this issue associated with pacing where we're trying to work with students collectively and we reach a point where we say it's time to move on. So you may need additional time specific to memorizing those letters, but we don't unfortunately have a lot of those opportunities inherently built into our existing system. It also is then a question of recurrence or transfer. So some students are able to memorize those letters very quickly, demonstrate it in a setting associated with an assessment, but then a year later, they couldn't do the same thing. And so really, how are we building in that long-term working memory to enhance education, not just in that single assessed space, but overall to inform their next efforts? Last but not least, school-wide studies of CBE. So for this one, I really just want to highlight actually the dates associated with these studies, both Rand as well as Nellie Mae in 2015, 2017. You'll note that as competency has emerged across the educational spectrum moving forward, we're still working on studies associated with is competency successful as a larger system effort. In regards to that and informing progress, it's important to note that competency is identified by the research field as one of 4 personalization strategies, and that in early studies we've seen significantly impacts in math and positive impacts in ELA, but not statistically significant. Really what these studies speak to is the fact that there is suggestive evidence that personalized learning has a positive impact, but that more research needs to be done to really inform the larger field, and that research base is going to be dependent on implementation in our system. So let's chat quickly about Utah and what's the history associated with this effort in Utah. When I started with competency, I really likened it to going to Mars. Mars is really exciting. If you ask any of our students in the K-12 setting, hey, you want to go to Mars? The answer is yes. It's very exciting. It's like, yes, I'd love to. I want to be an innovator. I want to be a trailblazer. It's going to be amazing. And then you start to talk to some of the adults in the room, and they're like, whoa, no, there is no Mars. Because that's really scary, and it's disruptive, and it's challenging, and how are we going to get them there? And competency really fits within that world, where there's a lot of excitement around the vision, but when we start to get into the logistics, individuals in the field are like, whoa, 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 this is a lot. And so that's been really the nature of our conversation, where we started and even where we are today. So with that, it's important to note our role as staff here at the State Board of Education. We are truly looking to set the stage for LEA innovation. That's very different than we are defining the strategies that we expect the field to implement. So I want you to note that as staff, our approach has been to support LEAs to be empowered innovative steps. One of the things we've noted across the field with competency is that when people were engaging in this space, they often felt like they had to hide it. They had to keep it hidden in regards to not letting everyone know that they were doing this innovation for fear of kind of, I guess I would say, negative inputs back, where it's like, well, you can't do that. You can't do that with kids. And so from our perspective, we want to make sure that it's an open dialogue and conversation with our innovators in the field. We're also looking to address barriers. So once we have that dialogue in supporting that innovation, getting feedback from our local implementers, we hear from some momentarily, to be able to inform then efforts at the state level, flexibility for that local control. Last but not least is providing resources and networks for sharing lessons learned. So really looking at the fact that there are many engaged in this space and that we don't want everyone to have to learn the same lesson by themselves. We want to foster communication so that as best practices start to emerge from those innovators, it's being shared across the state of Utah. So when we began this, we started by issuing a survey. Who's interested in competency-based education? This was back in 2017. We surveyed state curriculum directors, and we're very surprised that 80% said they had an interest level. 70% were interested in piloting, which was actually quite a large number based on the fact that this is a new and innovative practice. The majority, however, of our leaders identified as beginners. And so we asked them, so what questions do you have? And that's the little screenshot you can see to the left. That's a Padlet we created. And the questions you can see were numerous, ranging from everything about grading systems to state supports to how are these students getting into higher education to how do we fund, create a resource and a schedule setting that supports this type of a vision. So lots of questions in the field, although there was excitement. So rather than jumping right into the issuing of planning grants, as a state with the work of our Competency-Based Advisory Committee, we opted to break it down into two steps. The first one being an exploratory pilot, and the second one then being the issuing of planning grants. The role of the exploratory pilot was to be able to create a more shared vision around what is competency in the state of Utah, defining roles in regards to expectations for the state as well as for our local LEA leaders, establishing that shared vocabulary and really providing guardrails associated with these efforts. One of the things that happens often in innovation is that it gets exciting and everyone says they're doing it. So it's like we're all doing competency when really they don't necessarily meet all the 5 elements that are dictated in code. So as part of the exploratory pilot, we engaged with 14 LEAs starting in summer of 2017. You'll note that they range in regards to geography as well as size and students and communities served. Those entities joined us for an opportunity to visit both local as well as national models for competency, kind of asking the question of what does this look like? So the vision itself was agreed upon. However, what implementation strategies are taking place to achieve that vision, and how do they differ across, different efforts? In regards to those actually then informed the creation of the Competency-Based Education Framework. So this was released in 2018. It does include our legislative definitions for competency. It includes the measures for competency, which we'll highlight here momentarily, and provides that guardrails associated with the vision. So you can see that our competency-based framework is based around 4 key items: learner-led, learner-demonstrated, learner-focused, and learner-connected. So one of the things that was really encouraged by our advisory group was that we built on existing work that was already happening in the field as opposed to creating something completely new and different. So you'll note within our competency framework that the elements that are included in each of those 4 categories are actually our existing Utah Effective Educator standards. So looking at those standards, though, through the lens of competency and really creating a different framework through which local schools as well as districts and charter schools could look at to be able to reframe the work they're doing. So I would ask the question, what examples have you seen in Utah schools that exemplify these elements? Tailored learning experiences that empower learners to understand their needs, learner demonstration associated with competency-based progressions, learner-led, where the learners are being entrusted to take agency over their own efforts, and last but not least, learner-connected, where anytime, anywhere, and socially embedded learning takes place that connects to families, educators, and communities. Many of these efforts are happening in your communities. They may not be identified as competency, but they are occurring. So how do we leverage those positive efforts forward in regards to constructing the state vision? I'd like to give you just 2 minutes to be able to discuss those 4 elements and things you may have seen in your local visiting of schools before we move on. Okay, no worries. So 20 seconds to wrap it up.
But it wasn't pretty perfect. It was just, it's also studies. So I think it's important to consider how
Excellent. Okay. So we did touch on the fact that we have measures associated with competency. And so we've broken down the measures in a slightly different fashion than I think is probably traditional of a lot of state programs. Recognizing that competency is a discussion about shifting an educational system, it's not something where we're going to, after 6 months of doing some of this work with students, be able to have those long-term outcomes that we're seeking, because the shift takes time. So what we've defined is leading indicators, which are those things that LEAs can look at as measures to inform their innovation when they're in their first 3 years of implementation. These elements are included in the competency-based learning framework to help inform the larger field. The second item we have are primary indicators. These are primary indicators that we encourage LEAs to look at and require for the purposes of the grant program to be able to have a measure where they're looking at changes once they've been implementing for 3 years, having made some of those system changes and work with their community, their teachers, their educators, and their parents, starting to use these items to be able to inform the success and areas of need associated with the choices they've made. Last but not least, we have long-term indicators, and this is really going to be the space of where students who have gone through a competency-based learning system, we're seeing outcomes of that system related to post-graduation. So those being in high school success metrics as well as post-secondary success. So in the world of competency, many individuals often refer to these elements as kind of the main measures of the system, and we just wanted to highlight for the board that we are looking at those measures, but those measures take place once we've had implementation for an entire cohort of students through a secondary experience. So that's a 4+ year experience. In regard competency-based learning timeline and work that we've been doing this current year, we finalized the competency-based framework in late fall 2018, where we developed then the planning grant in alignment with that framework, which was released in the winter this past year. We awarded the CBE planning grants this past spring, and those LEAs will begin their work starting July 1st. And then we are moving towards the development of competencies, which I'll touch on momentarily. So planning grant awardees for FY 2020, you can see them listed here on the screen for you. You'll note again, they range in their geography as well as their size and their implementation efforts. Some of these LEAs are looking to do a very targeted pilot specific to a population within their school, such as Iron County School District is focusing on their school system available for alternative educational models for students who engage in that type of a setting, whereas we have others who are further along, such as Juab School District, who's here today to talk about their experience, where they've actually been engaged in this work as a complete LEA and are looking to really inform an iteration on that work as they take steps forward, because they have quite the history of experiences behind them as they move forward. So we've included some quotes in your backup from different leaders. The one I wanted to highlight was American Academy of Innovation, who is our charter school who's in this first pilot group. You'll note that they've stated competency-based education is vital to AII because it allows students to advance and grow at their pace. Competency-based program allowing students to build on their knowledge in an environment that fosters critical thinking skills is really their focus, and that they're thrilled to have this opportunity to begin planning and looking at system efforts and changes that will occur over the next couple of years as they look to progress in advancing this model. Last for my component of the second to last for my component of the presentation, I did want to note in the effort that we're setting the stage for LEAs to really lead out and be local innovators in this work, we are providing 3 different options of technical supports for our local local education agencies in this space. The first one is a membership to the Mastery Transcript Consortium. This is for our secondary schools as well as some of our junior highs who are looking at how do we redefine the transcript specific to competency, and being able to do that with a larger national network of schools who's also working and innovating within that space. We did have 23 high schools within the awarded planning grant LEAs who have opted to participate in this first cohort with Mastery Transcript Consortium, and we're excited to see the outcomes of that first year. The second element we're providing is access to the LEAP personalized learning surveys and reports. These are student and teacher surveys that look at those 4 elements in the competency-based framework and allow an opportunity for an LEA to get formative feedback related to how are my teachers and students experiencing these elements, and how does that inform our work as district and charter school leaders. Last but not least, we are offering individual coaching available for LEAs through our partners at TNTP. They will be providing individualized coaching. If we're going to speak or talk the talk of personalized learning, we want to walk that walk in our state supports. And this provides them an opportunity to really receive that personalized support related to their plan and vision, and connecting them with resources to be able to advance. We did have some recent national attention. Excel and Ed wrote a blog post specific to our efforts in implementing next generation learning, really highlighting some of this work related to competency, the recent awarding of the planning grant opportunities, and last but not least, the legislative award associated with advancing the program into implementation grants.
So Sarah has done a wonderful job at setting the stage and speaking to some of the history and the research and what has gotten us to where we are. And you might be asking the question, well, what is the future? Or perhaps more importantly, how are we learning from local innovation to help inform these next steps? I want to provide just a quick overview of some of these next steps related to the CBE planning, or the grant program. Starting with the planning grants that Sarah alluded to, there were 14 LEAs that applied to participate in these planning grants, and 7 of them, as was alluded to, were awarded. They'll start beginning their work in July 1st this next fiscal year. And these LEAs, as well as other LEAs in future years that receive planning grants, will have an opportunity to then apply for an implementation grant. We were fortunate enough and are excited about the ongoing appropriation of $2 million to help support.
And I understand your point. You need feedback of, I have excelled, I have mastered this part, because I can't tell whether I have or not, right? And so that's part of the discussion going on right now about competency-based with the board, because that's the direction Utah State is moving. And so so the question is, whose definition are we using? Right?
Hey, we're still
Competent, right? If somebody's ideology is different from the
Hey, Lisa?
will the teacher say, oops, that's me. I'm so sorry. I was not on mute. I'm so sorry.
Okay, all right, thank you. We're continuing, all right.
So we're excited about the $2 million ongoing appropriation for LEAs that are moving from planning grants into the implementation grant phase. Although funding levels are not yet determined, as LEAs move along this pipeline from planning grants to implementation grants, they'll then have the ability to apply for expansion grants, and we will be seeking funding as LEAs move to implementation to help support that next level of expansion grants. There are several next steps to consider, and I want to just quickly highlight a few of them. All of you are very familiar with Utah's Portrait of a Graduate, which we are super excited about, was approved and released yesterday. Moving forward, we are working towards the development of a competency-based learning network for Utah LEAs to help each other in sharing of best practices that are learned at the local level. And we're also now working towards the development of Utah competency prototypes that are in alignment with standards for secondary education, and anticipate being able to begin that work later this fall, moving into the spring. really in order to highlight the local innovation that's happening around our state. We are grateful for 3 local innovation leaders that have accepted the invitation to come and to join us today and to tell their story about how they are leading the efforts around competency-based learning in their LEA. So, Chair, with your permission, we would like to invite the following individuals to the table.
Okay, please invite them up. Do you want to, you're going to handle the introductions? We need to turn those mics. Yeah, there we go.
So first, Dr. Roy
There's a third one
Darrington,
also there.
Assistant Superintendent from Juab School District. Dr. Ryan Hansen, Director of Digital Learning from Davis School District, and Nick Harris, Technology Media Supervisor in Weber School District.
Do we get to keep the water? Hello.
So we've asked each of them
Hey.
to
Okay, you're going to get a little closer to that mic, or grab the one that's next to you.
Sure.
There you go.
Thank you. We've asked each of them to specifically start by sharing a few slides and telling their story about why they're pursuing CBE. They've also each prepared responses and thought through the additional questions that are provided here. So, Chair, we'll defer to you as far as questions that may be from the board that may be directed specifically to them or to us, but we'll first ask them to share some of their thoughts specific to why they are pursuing CBE and then move to additional questions afterwards.
Okay, please continue. Yeah.
All right, well, that loud enough. Thank you for allowing us to be here today. We appreciate the invitation. I want to say thank you personally from our school district in Juab School District.
Can
We-
you say on the, would you introduce yourself as you guys go
Roy
through some of the
Darrington,
people that are
Juab School
online?
District.
Thank you.
We have really appreciated the support as a small rural district in Utah. Having your support in the efforts to pilot and access some of the grants that we've been able to access has provided us with resources that we wouldn't probably have had to do some of the work that we've been doing around trying to meet the needs of individual students where they're at. Up on the slide we were asked to present 2 slides that we thought could kind of frame our conversation a little bit in our own district. So this is Juab School District's portrait of a graduate, and we've been working on this for probably about 2 to 3 years. And as you look at that, it should look somewhat similar to the same types of skills, knowledge, and disposition aspects that the state adopted in their portrait of a graduate, and we're really excited for that work and what the next steps may lead from that. But as you look at that, in the left column, as we talk about knowledge, well, that's pretty standard and has been pretty standard in education for a long time. These are our curriculum standards and those things that we say are important that students should know from a knowledge base. And also always has been embedded in learning the skills and dispositions that we hope our students leave schools with. The problem with that side of it is we always say that we hope students have left with these skills and dispositions, and we try to embed these skills and dispositions in the work we do in education. So for us, by making those part of our portrait of a graduate, that really does become an intentional statement by our district to say these are the things that we hold to be valuable, and these were developed through stakeholder input, students and parents and teachers, community business leaders. But with these being given equal importance in our district, we basically have made a bold statement to our community saying, not only do we recognize that we hold all of these aspects of the whole child to be important for the students that are leaving our district, but we are going to be very intentional in our efforts to make sure that we are meeting these very clear standards or competencies that we have put in front of our students. And so why I bring this as my first slide for our district is because as our school board tackles their 5-year strategic planning, which we're in the process of right now and hoping to finish at the end of this month, our task that we've been given and that's in front of us is how do we show that intentional effort, that intentional work to not just hope that these skills and dispositions have been embedded along with standards that have always been there and in front of us, but are intentionally there, and that we can show evidence that those things are happening and that students are learning them. And so that's where the work around competency has affected us, because it's with competency, it kind of gives that framework that we say, okay, the same work we use in our district with competency around knowledge base is the same practices that we use to try to specifically focus on skills and dispositions, more than just hoping that they're embedded in the practices that we focus on. And if you go back to the 5th prong, which we don't have that slide up, but when you talk about the 5 prongs of competency, the 5th one says it is this opportunity for students to access deep learning through while showing skills and dispositions in their learning. So if you'll, Sarah, if you'll jump to that next one. So this right here is really where our focus is currently as a district. We have gone through the work over the last 5 years to really develop what we feel is a hyper focus on those intentional standards of learning, and we call them in our district power standards, learning outcomes and indicators, for our competency work around our knowledge base, our core curriculum. And we've got to where we feel like we're in a pretty good spot with that. Still making mistakes, obviously, still learning, but that's something we've given a lot of attention to. Our intention now, currently, is the development and work around performance assessments. And those performance assessments that we're going to be focusing on moving forward in the future are they're not a new idea by any means, but it is kind of taking the traditional thought about what we're looking for in education and kind of flipping it backwards. Traditionally, we say we look for students to demonstrate knowledge of understanding of core content. And we hope that in the process, some of these embedded skills and dispositions will find their way into our students. We are actually turning that backwards and saying we are going to intentionally focus on skills and develop performance assessments around this. And we'll use our knowledge or our core contents as the vehicle rather than the driver. The driver will be the skills. So for example, if you look at this is our framework for our district. And these are the skills that we've identified, and we took these from 21st century skills, the 4 C's of 21st century skills, and kind of broke them out and highlighted some very specific things that we feel and our community feels are important that students can do and access and be competent in, and they don't speak necessarily to any specific content. And so in our district, our next steps with the performance assessments would be to say, okay, students, in this performance assessment, we are going to focus on perhaps information and discovery as a skill, flexibility as a skill, communicating using digital media as a skill, and creative production and innovation. So as an educator, as a teacher, I would then spend time while using my content, which we've already identified the essential learnings of content, I would use that to have intentional conversations with my students about these very specific skills. What are they? Our students don't naturally understand what does it mean creative production and innovation. But by creating a common language in our district around it that starts in preschool, this is pre-K through 12. Every year we hope that our students by the end of the year will create a digital, let me clarify. Secondary will be a digital portfolio. Elementaries will be a portfolio that is appropriate to their grade level of evidences, physical, tangible evidences of artifacts that they created using specific skills, not to put those skills in a grade book. That's not our intention. But around competencies within those skills, we want our teachers to be able to have meaningful conversations with the students about what the skills are, what proficiency in that skill can look like, and where students are at in their development of that skill. And in the meantime, parallel to that, assess for learning in the content area, which is something we're currently very much invested in and using. So that is kind of our current reality and where we're moving. But none of this work happens without kind of that underpinning support of what competency work is. Competency in and of itself, without competencies, you really don't have any type of hard target that you can use to balance a 360-degree approach by students. And that's what personalized learning is to our district. If we can't provide success for any student in our district, then we've got to change something we're doing, because that's kind of the challenge we've given to ourselves. And so competency becomes the mechanism that helps us to hold to a standard, unchangeable. That's a target that's not changeable. But everything else, we can be flexible in everything else to help students get to where they need to be.
Yeah, so I'm Ryan Hansen with the Davis School District, and on behalf of Davis, thanks for all that you do, all the time that you spend, and the conversations that you have. And key to personalized learning is choice and voice, and we value choice, but we also value voice. We're better when we have different voices coming to the conversation, and we can collaborate. And you hear a lot of those different voices, so those things that you share with us and the decisions you make, they're of value to us. But that's hard. It's really hard to have those conversations and to be able to do that effectively. So here is our current definition of personalized learning that we use. It's still being vetted. It's still being looked at by our teachers, administrators, by our community. And I'll spare you, I won't read it for you, but if you'd like to look at it, it's there. And then we can flip to the next one. Key to that, key to personalization is learner-centered. So everything else is flexible, but the needs of the child. We want to provide choices to families. We want to, but then it's competency driven. So we've got to define what competency is, and then we can provide choices on how to get there. So the first conversation is about competency, and we're engaged in that on a large scale, or with the help of Sarah and Todd, we're defining what competency looks like, so that our community, we can be. Our model for school improvement is to allow local communities the opportunity to innovate. So innovation is in the hands of the community. It's our job as a school district to support that innovation. And from that, we think we'll have a lot of different approaches that come towards how to best meet competency for students. And we can support that. And through that big conversation, that's where we find best practice. But we've got to define competency and then give the choice. Students need ubiquitous access. Technology helps us accomplish that. Give kids 24/7 access to opportunities to advance academically. That's what we're working towards. And the role of technology in this is all to enhance the influence of the teacher and not to detract from it. The connection between the person teaching and the student learning that's what we do. That's what this is all about. And we can strengthen that through choice with the effective use of technology and access. So that's what we're doing. The why, the why goes back to the Declaration of Independence, pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. We wanted to we want to give students access to a high quality life and the ability to pursue their own happiness. But we think personalized learning, the ideas associated with personalized learning best help us as a system to accomplish that with children. So that goes back to choice and meeting the needs of the individual rather than a system or a group. So that's where we're at. We appreciate your help and support, especially with this grant. Todd and Sarah have been awesome and outstanding in their support of us in doing that. They represent you extremely well. Just wanted you to know that, so thank you.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to echo. I will. I wanted to echo Dr. Darrington and Dr. Hansen's in that. Thank you for what you do for us. My name's Nick Harris. I'm the Technology and Media Supervisor in Weber School District. I bring a little bit different perspective in that I was asked to be the Technology and Media Supervisor 2 years ago. I got promoted from being a junior high principal into the district office, and in November of that year, our current Weber Innovation High principal got moved to Davis School District as the superintendent. And so my superintendent called me and asked me to continue what I was doing as the supervisor of technology and to be the principal of the Weber Innovation High School. So I bring a little bit different perspective to personalized learning because my son was also a attendee there at the Weber Innovation High as a sophomore. And so I've seen from an administrator's point of view and also from a parent's point of view what personalized learning looks like. And, I also share the vision of Weber School District. One of the ways that I think about this is articulated very well in Sal Khan, who created the Khan Academy, but also wrote the book, The One World Schoolhouse. It's a great read. One World Schoolhouse. He talks about in our equation for education, the thing currently that's fixed is time, and the variable is student competency and whether the student can provide that sense of, yeah, I've mastered the skill. What Sal Khan tries to get changed, and what we tried to do at Weber Innovation High is flip that on its head so that the variable is time, and what's fixed is that the student will demonstrate competency at a high level. And so our vision is of course, as these guys have kind of mentioned, is to empower the learner, today's learner, give them some choice, which is what I was looking for as a parent. And then, it's the thing that makes it viable is technology, is that ability for a kid to be on, a different level than another child, and the teacher has the ability to have all these students maybe in a learning management system so they can keep track of where the students are, so that time is the variable. If you'll move forward. Yeah. So let me you can see part of our vision was that we allow for time, place, path, and pace there at Weber Innovation High School. And so to give you the 500-foot view, I'll just give you a parent's example of my son. So my son is very, very good at English. The English language arts comes easy to him. And so his 10th grade year, he was able to demonstrate competency to his teachers and finish his sophomore year in 2 quarters. So his sophomore year of English language arts, he was able to move quickly through those. He was also able to finish geography, World Civ in that same time. Now, like his dad, he's not very good at math. And so he was able to spend at least 3 hours a day with a math teacher in that secondary math that was challenging for me as a high school student, and it was also challenging for him. He was able to spend a ton of time, and the time was what was the variable, but he still demonstrated competency at a high level, and his ACT, I was very proud of it when he finished that. I was pumped as a parent and pumped as an administrator to say, look, this is exactly what we wanted to see.
So I know their time was short, and there's so much more that they could talk about, and I'm sure that they would like to talk about. Hopefully you could feel the passion that they have to help support student learning and to provide systems that help teachers support students. So we've prepared some additional questions, and Chair, depending on the time that is available. We're happy to go through some of these big questions and facilitate that conversation. We're also welcome to, or are willing to take questions from the board that may be directed to these three leaders or to USBE staff, whichever approach makes most sense.
We have about maybe 10 minutes to go through these, and then I'm sure board members have questions and that, so.
Perfect, thank you. So let's go ahead then, Dr. Darrington, if you wouldn't mind addressing this first question related to communicating to your local board, community, and families, and the role that's had with your efforts.
Yeah, so I would say that if you are not communicating what you're doing as a district, number one, with your school board, you're probably not going to get very far. Even if your school board is on board and you're not communicating with families, it's going to quickly, it's enough different from the traditional world of education that most of us experienced and are experts in because we've had 13 years of experience. We should all have a doctorate in public education because, we've been there. If you don't communicate clearly, you are going to leave people behind with questions. And it's in those questions of without clarity that they tend to have misconceptions or misideas or those type of things. So it was very intentional in Juab School District starting 6 years ago that as we started to make incremental changes to the world of trying to get to personalized learning, and that really is our goal. Again, I stated it earlier. Meet every student where they're at and provide for their needs. That doesn't happen overnight, but the idea and the goal should, I would hope, be the goal of every school district. But in that process, we started making incremental changes, and as we made those incremental changes, we communicated out weekly with our parents. We held what count nights, inviting our community members back to school nights. We would have surveys available and information available. Our school board is very involved, and so for us, that was an easy part. They would attend conferences with us. They would come and be part of our admin work sessions, just so they were comfortable in the conversations we were having. And they would, obviously, we relied on them to voice their concerns so we could work through those challenges and answer those questions. But having an open communication system and just moving in incremental steps, that for us, that was an intentional practice, never to go so far from what quote unquote is traditional that it looked like a black and white change from one day to the next. And that's been really important. If you talk to our teachers, they're often amazed that people are even curious as to what we're doing in Juab and why it's even that big of a deal. And I know some of you have toured our schools and talked to our teachers. They really will just tell you, I don't know what the big deal is. And part of that is because they've just been in the process of slow incremental change, that to them it is still their traditional classroom. But yet when you step back in a snapshot and look at what they're doing and looking what a lot of other traditional classrooms are doing, when it comes to meeting students in a personalized opportunity, it's night and day difference. And so I think that goes to that communication aspect. For us, that's where our success has been found in that process is just lots of open dialogue, answering questions, asking to be challenged. That's important. And then slowly evolving. And we still have a long ways to go and lots of questions to answer.
Thank you.
You want me to take it? Oh,
If you'd like to
shot
add.
at it. Well, I'd just say, Juab, as far as we can tell, has clearly defined what personalized learning looks like and competency looks like in their school district, as well as or better than maybe anybody else in the country. So they're ahead of us in that regard, and as far as being able to define what it looks like for their students. I think they have the highest graduation rate in the state, right? And I think we're second, and we're coming for them, but we're not there yet. So we, as I said before, innovation is kind of a community-driven process in our schools. We had Farmington High School that took a strong look at Summit Learning, the Summit Learning platform, and went in with Summit Learning, for this past school year. We know that we need to do a better job of communicating with communities as to the type of change that happens in a community when you go all in with the competency-based system. So we've learned a lot of lessons in that regard. The best way we can communicate how we're moving forward, and even in Farmington, is simply to say, come in and see. Come see what students are doing, see how this system is functioning, and a lot of people are a lot more comfortable with that program once they see what's happening. So we'd extend that invitation to you. And again, it's a part of that bigger conversation about this and how we meet the needs of students. We may not always use Summit at Farmington High School, and yet we may. We have other schools that are looking at it. But we want to be completely transparent with what we're doing and what's happening, and take every opportunity to communicate that with our community. So we're growing, and I think it's important not to get locked in to any part of a system that again, it's back to personalization for our community, and choice for students and choice for communities. So those are our focuses.
Thank you. Did you want to add to that, Nick?
I do want to add just a little
Yeah,
bit,
please.
because one of the ways we communicate, and I'll echo Ryan in that come up and look at it. That's been our biggest point. But I wanted to say one of the things that was key in communicating was also educating both our administrators, our high school administrators, as well as our counselors, so that they could really provide direction for kids and give them what is appropriate, and let them know that there is that choice out there. And so I'll you can keep going.
Perfect. Thank you. Chair, are we at our 10 minutes now? Question. You bet. Great. Thank you. So the last question, what advice do you have to the Utah State Board of Education moving forward? Each of you have had a chance to kind of think through that. Are there any specific comments that you would like to share with the board?
I think the only advice that I would offer would be to continue to be flexible in your allowing policies to be looked at and adjusted and considered, and resources considered to allow local LEAs to work in this. And I'm going to use the term playground in this space, because on a worldwide scope in this conversation of trying to meet and prepare students where they're at for jobs and opportunities and a future that in most of their cases actually hasn't even been invented yet, hasn't even been created, that's a pretty daunting task. So having that opportunity to move away from a one-size-fits-all expectation for all students and into a space where we have the flexibility to meet students for their future and what they and their parents want for them, I think that's really, really important. And there's a large number of aspects to that, but flexibility would be the key.
Yeah, we just you have a lot of people that engage you in these conversations, but just to build on what Roy said, don't ever hesitate to call or ask. And in the absence of good or accurate information, we all tend to make things up. So feel free to call, and if we can be of any help to you, let us know. But and then echo what he said.
And I would say maybe a little piece of advice or hope from my point of view is that, again, provide some flexibility and some space for us to iterate, because it's not easy. But I would love to have open channels of communication, so we're not all reinventing the wheel. Each district, we can kind of see a framework and then fit it into our culture and what fits for us, and room for that would be so valuable for us.
Thank you for all of your thoughts. Hopefully it's clear from a staff perspective that we are learning from these leaders in addition to so many others across the state, that we're listening to what they're doing and trying to help build a system that can help support them and provide that flexibility that they're alluding to. So Chair, other questions that may be...
Yeah, we've got quite a few questions. I hope we can get through them. And so, board members, if you can be very precise on your questions, and let's do one at a time. We've got about, I believe, Board Member Lisa Cummins had one, and then right now I've got 4 others. So in the interest of time, if you can just be very precise. We'll go with you first. Excuse me. Board Member Lisa Cummins, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair, and I apologize for the interruptions earlier. Thank you for your presentations. I really appreciated listening to them. But then 2 questions really fast. Do you engage parents with that student's learning, with the competency-based learning or personalized learning? And 2, have you thought about putting those options up on ULead so that other districts and schools can see what you're doing?
Okay. Sarah, do you want to run who wants to answer that? Okay.
So, Dr. Darrington, if you'd like to respond.
So I would like to address on the involving parents in that competency-based learning discussion. That is something that we, in the early stages, we were involving them in trying to clarify these are what learning standards are. This is what learning at high levels looks like. But we quickly realized that in the conversation of personalized learning, the piece we were missing was having that engagement early and often with parents and students to say, what is the target you want to hit? We had all the flexibility in our system to provide for multiple ways for students to access learning that they wanted, but we were missing the piece where we were bringing the students and parents in and saying, okay, you tell us what target you're trying to hit. And so that we've adjusted, and we are currently in the process of building out what's called a 4-year rolling plan that starts in 6th grade. And in that 6th grade, they will meet with their parents and students and the counselor, and they will say, today, which for a 6th grader, tomorrow could be different, but today, this is what I want, this is where I want to go, and then chart out the next 4 years. And that happens every year from 6th grade, happens in 7th grade, 8th grade, clear through 12th grade. So in 12th grade, they're also charting out with their parents and the student, what does it look like 3 years post-high school? So that is a very important piece.
Great.
Okay. Was there a second part to?
I would just follow up, Sarah Young. I would just follow up with the second part of that. So in regards to ULead, I think that's a great opportunity for us as staff to work with Director Withers in regards to being able to take some of these lessons learned from the community and make sure that they're available in that research space. So we appreciate that suggestion and can act on it.
Okay. Board Member
Great, thank you.
Jenny Earl.
Thank you for coming and presenting. So I like the idea of authentic assessment, and specifically, I know in the law here, it says diverse assessment instruments shall, such as authentic assessments, projects, and portfolios. I think I'm excited to see what comes the next couple of years as we look at more authentic assessment that really looks at what students are learning. And so I don't know if you hit a little bit on it, I think so, earlier. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but I'm excited to be part of that movement. So.
I can. I agree with you. One of our goals on our roadmap at Weber Innovation High is that our kids come in and begin a digital portfolio, and they work on it, and then throughout their high school career, and then have something when they graduate to be able to show, look at the showcase and look at what I did. I think that's key, and that is in our plan for sure.
Yeah, so we're actually using our competency-based education grant funds to try to get to assessment. So, but there's stages, right? So we've got to prioritize what we want our students to be able to know and do, and then we engage our teachers. And we're this year we'll all of our core teachers and math, English, and science high school teachers will receive a stipend for helping us in this process, and we're going to use technology to connect them. Video meetings. So when I say connect them, I'm talking from one school to the next. So, that's for us. That's 11 high schools. But we need all of our English 10 teachers talking about what competency looks like for that course. And so once we can agree on those things that we need to teach, then which would be our standards, power standards, then we need to define what it looks like. So if we say we want to help a student get to here, now we need to define what it looks like if we actually do that. So at the end of this experience, this student will be able to know and do these things, and that would be a rubric. And then from the rubric, we need to go back and build that assessment. And we want to get to higher levels of depth of knowledge and skill on the assessment, not just 1 and 2, referring to anyway, you've heard that before, I'm sure, but so we want to get into allowing portfolios, video presentations, audio, in addition to multiple choice and those types of things. So we think technology will help us be able to do that, but those conversations are coming, and this grant is helping us to get there, and that's why we're so appreciative of that grant funding.
I would just add to that real quickly that on the end of this grant, the access to the Mastery Transcript Consortium, that actually is a transcripting service that will follow students, that colleges and universities can access, that we will design around our competencies. So when we say this is the competency we were trying to hit, and we said this student was competent in this standard, they can click on it and it will pull up the actual artifact or artifacts that we used as a school to say that student was proficient. So universities and colleges have access to that, so they don't just have to take our transcript at face value. They can actually vet students' work, which is in essence the digital portfolios as well. But that's going to be a great resource that comes with this grant as well.
We still have quite a few board members in the queue here. Board Member Bolter.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. This was a great presentation. So I know we've talked and you've known my hesitancy for competency-based, and thank you very much. You did an excellent job. And you addressed what things would look like in the future as far as like grades and transcripts and the questions that you're asking. I'm wondering also, and any of you, in the law, it says that the student would have control over time, place, path, and pace. And so I have questions about all of those, but I'll focus on the one. What do you foresee in the future that will look like as far as seat time? If a student feels like they want to work more at home or maybe in a park, I don't know. And have you guys addressed that and talked about that, and what will it look like as far as our idea of seat time and learning in a traditional brick and mortar school versus another location or place?
So just to give the quick state perspective, and then I'll turn it over to our local leaders. From the state perspective as program leads, we're not looking to dictate one model over another. At this point, we're really turning to our local leaders in regards to seeking strategies that make sense for their communities and their resources. So I would really ask our local leaders to speak to maybe like a quick 1 minute on some of the diverse options you all currently offer.
So that's the beauty of competency, because if you have a standard that you expect, that's a standard of learning that you expect students to meet, and that is clearly defined, then really everything else is flexible, and it's as flexible as you're willing to be as a school. We have students that come to us with all different kinds of needs, from medical to, hey, I'm endorsed, I'm on a national motocross cycle, I'm one of the best in the country. I'm making lots of money. This is my career, but I still want a high school diploma. Well, we could easily put them on packets and send them on their way, but it's much easier to use some of the tools that we have and just be flexible and not be concerned that they're not in class, as long as they're still working and we have communication with them that this plan is what their plan is and they're moving along their plan. Once you take those compliance levers off of the school and the teachers to not be worried about attendance for that student as long as they're progressing, now you can be really creative to meet that student for what their needs are. But what does it look like in the future? I think once we can wrap our heads around this idea that one size fits all never has worked and never will work, then the sky's the limit. And to say it's going to look like this, the best I could say is it's going to look different for every student.
So the feedback we get from our community is that some of the aspects of the traditional high school experience are really valued. So extracurricular activities, sports, dances. Not only are they fun, but we think they're extremely valuable to students as well. But our parents are asking us for other opportunities like freedom from schedule, ability to advance, the ability to work on college material while they're still in high school. But we don't think, and they don't think, sending a 10th grader to college, to University of Utah, putting them on campus is necessarily best. So being able to provide those opportunities and still some of the best parts of the traditional high school experience, but then allowing the family to choose what's best. So not inserting our values on the values of the family, but allowing the family to dictate those things that are best for them and their child. And we support that. That's what we're after. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
And I would echo those same things, except for I would say I would love to see seat time be looked at differently than it traditionally has been. And one thing that I would say is we always need to focus on having a great teacher in the classroom and access to the great teacher. Now, that might not just be a teacher up lecturing and 30 students sitting there listening, but just access to a great teacher is still key. So I would say a blended model, because if a student is just in a park on their computer, that's just an online classroom. And I would say blended is the key. And a good example of that is I had a student that was on the national ski team. And he was in Brazil, but still wanted to, and he still needed to attend the daily lectures. And we were able to, have some Skype calls. So he could still be, using technology, still be down in Brazil doing his thing, pursuing his career and his passion. But at the same time, he was able to have access to a teacher and still attended class, just not in a seat. He was in a seat in Brazil.
I still have a whole bunch in the queue, so maybe if we have one answer, or maybe if they want to direct their question to one particular district, that might be a good way so we can get through this. We have another meeting starting at 11, but I don't know how to manage this time very well. But so we'll go to Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. As I was driving into a meeting at the State Board this week, I was listening to KSL, and they were talking about U.S. News and World Report. They have issued the top 10 high schools in the state of Utah. And several of them are little tiny schools with, maybe 200 kids. But there was one, the top one had about 2,100 kids, and it was Davis High. So my question is directed to you, Mr. Hanson. You have an outstanding high school. They're working on a traditional model, and they're being most successful in our state. So I'm wondering about the challenges of changing the model and the buy-in from teachers when you have such a successful entity going. What kind of challenges are presented to you with getting teacher buy-in and changing these things for students?
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that. I'm a former Dart. My mom taught English at Davis High for 20, 30 years, and and I've got a sister that's a counselor there. So, that's a school that's very near and dear to the heart of a lot of people in that community, and that's what we want for every one of our schools. Davis High has always been an innovative institution. They were first in small learning communities, and then professional learning communities, and then and they're doing a lot of things that allow them to personalize the experience for students there. So we wanted to pull on all aspects of success in that community and continue to do those things that are working. Continue to give more students access to those teachers that are outstanding, and a lot of times that can be done with technology. And then also, listening to that community. Davis High is a big place, and it's hard to be exceptional in that community with so many exceptional students in a high-achieving community. There's still elements of that school population that aren't as successful as we'd like them to be. And that's what we're looking at with personalization. We can't make the world Davis High. We need to provide that personalized experience that a lot of students get at Davis High and give that to all students there. So that's very challenging to do that, but that's our goal. Well, yeah. So we in regards to what we want to do with competency, some of those departments have best defined what competency looks like, or better than other schools in our school district. So if you look at Davis High's math department, they've best defined what competency looks like for each of their students, and they're really good at when students are falling off of that progression line or that pace, going back and helping those students to meet the needs of their curriculum. So we would say that's who we want to look to as an example to help us in this conversation about what competency is and how we get students there. And they use Canvas to do that better than, that department uses Canvas to do that better than anybody else probably in our school district. So their curriculum's available. There's a lot of things that they do that we want to do at other places. But if you look at Clearfield High, the socioeconomic status of Clearfield is different than Davis, and there are things that Clearfield is also is outstanding at, and we need to look to them in other areas to support kids as well. So.
Okay, Vice Chair Brittany, comments?
My question is for Mr. Harris. One of the examples that you gave in your presentation was your son who excelled in English language arts but struggled in math. And so I'm curious if you guys have developed some strategies for students that seem to have stalled, or they seem to be taking too much time on a concept. What do you do to redirect that so that they don't just get stuck when we're talking about their own timing of progress?
Oh, that's a great question, and that was one of our challenges for sure. Is that the other challenge is just, hey, if you give like my son a computer and say, hey, go learn, he's going to go watch YouTube, right? I mean, because he's a teenager, and that's what he's going to do. And so we did have a lot of ways, and I don't have a lot of time to go into it, but one of the things we did was mentoring. Every teacher has a group of students that they mentor, and using Google Documents as a shared and shared folders, those teachers can look and see where the student is. And if you have a student that, hey, it's second quarter and you still don't have first quarter credit in that math, then you need to meet with me. Let's talk and see what we can do to increase that. So I think there's a lot of need for an adult to be watching the students in their path.
Okay, Board Member Lear.
Thank you.
Sean, you're on deck, Sean.
I had, should
No,
Sean
no,
be next?
no, he's on deck. I'm just getting him ready.
I actually have 7 questions, and I won't ask them all. But I have 2 that I feel like
Let's have 'em.
Came down to 2 that I felt were most important. First of all, I looked at the map again of the schools that are, and maybe this is a better question for Sarah, which also might move this along, but I looked at the map of the schools that are identified and the school districts specifically, because it's hard to generalize about the charter schools. But they're in very traditional communities, in very, where I would dare say if we looked at the demographics, there are more intact families. I represent one district that is not that way. I'm wondering how this program works in a setting where families may not have access to internet, families may not have access to computers, families have maybe often one parent, they don't speak English, they're more mobile. I worry that ironically, this innovative program is something for traditional families. Can you respond to that, Sarah or Todd, maybe?
Sure. So I think two components. It's important to note that this competency-based pilot is not a requirement here at the state of Utah, but is instead an opt-in. So we're really seeing individual LEAs who have had those initial conversations with their community, are evaluating the needs of their students and then their resources associated with that before they're starting down this pathway. So the fact that you're seeing kind of a different representation is really going to be specific to those conversations informing moving in. In regards to meeting more comprehensive needs, there are definitely gaps when it comes to access to some of the technological components that our leaders here today have spoken to. But I think it's important to note that personalized learning is not just about that access and that technology component, but it is truly about engaging with the individual student to understand their needs with their parents around creating what that plan looks like, whether there's a technology component or not. I think one of the examples that we at the state look to is the really important and innovative work that continues to happen with our special education department around creating those individualized educational plans for students, and how do we take that type of a model and bring it to not just students in special education, but all students in regards to informing those efforts. And I highlight that because especially in that space, it's not a technology solution. It's about looking at the individual child and their needs and then developing a comprehensive plan around supporting that child forward. And I think that work then informs a lot of the work we're looking to do to expand this to a larger population, such as the one you referenced.
And then just one other question that I hope others are thinking about. I admit I own the fact that I'm a career traditional educator. I mean, even back to my own high school, junior high, elementary experience. So I know I have that mindset, and I'm trying to make a shift. But one of the things I valued about that were the skills that are variously called people skills, interpersonal skills. One of the concerns I have is that those skills perhaps are being not lost, but there's not an emphasis on them in this model. And interestingly enough, I looked at your portrait of the graduate. I forget which school district had one, but also the state is working on one. And Jenny and I were looking at that, and those skills are seemingly minimized or lost in this discussion of personalized learning. The student who waits for another student or helps another student, or if he's bored, then he has to find a way to satisfy himself, to look for good things to do. And I worry about those skills being minimized. So just if one of you would respond.
If I could real quickly respond to that, because that is exactly why I started with and chose the slide that I chose. Because those skills are not just embedded, they are right in front of you. Collaboration, what does that mean? And all the components of that. You have to treat those skills as as actual competencies that you're intentionally trying to work towards, not just the traditional teacher, that some of them were good at doing that in their classroom with their students to generate discussion, and you had great teachers that have been able to do that forever, and you've had teachers that were never able to embed those in their classrooms forever. We're trying to say every teacher will intentionally focus on exactly what you're talking about as skills and dispositions, grit, resilience. All of those things are now power standards for our district. They are now competencies in and of themselves that we will intentionally be focusing on as just that. Because what you're saying is absolutely true. Those are probably more important than some of the other content standards.
In terms of life success, I think they absolutely are, but thank you for indulging me.
Thank you very much for being here today. Am I on? Okay. This is really encouraging. I think it's a long time coming. A couple of questions from me is, with Utah's impending shift in demographics, what strategies and measurements do you have to be able to include some of the underserved communities in these programs?
So I can speak to that. So, and keeping in mind, this isn't all about technology.
Yep,
like
exactly.
Technology is a key piece, but what we found in our most at-risk schools. So I was the principal at North Davis Junior High, and North Davis's junior high has a different demographic than Davis. So it's Clearfield. It was ranked in the state as when you talk about generational poverty, it's a city that receives support because of that. So North Davis is a Title I school. Bayview is in that community. Wasatch Elementary is in that community. But when we made significant improvements in student growth at those schools, it was because we clearly defined what competency looked like and provide personal support for students to get there. So when we started to do that, if you look at the end-of-level growth scores for North Davis over the last 5 years, you see as much growth, if not, I think in some of those in English and math, you're going to see a trend that is in your top 5 schools in the state as far as student growth is concerned. So we're drawing on that experience there we want to provide that same type of support in some of our high-end schools too. So we've been real successful. Well, this is the best way to be successful with populations that traditionally haven't been successful in our experience, and that's one of the reasons why we support this type of idea, personalization.
Okay.
Did you have am I good to go on?
Yeah, part 2. Competency leads to opportunity. And how are these programs being connected to the economy of Utah and setting these students up for pathways? You mentioned briefly some of these jobs that they're going to have don't exist now. But how do all these correlate, and what strategies are there to give them an overall general base to work from to be engaged in our economy in the future?
I can just mention that one of the great things at our school was that because kids are moving quickly, it created in their senior year an opportunity for internships. And we partnered with several different businesses near our school that gave kids just outstanding opportunities for internships and moving forward. Like, for example, white cloud printing, 3D printing. I had a student that really excelled in that area, and he was able to go over there and quickly became their social media manager as a senior in high school, because he understood that area so well, and it was a really good partnership, and several stories quite like that in my school.
And I think it's really important to touch on that this, because time can become flexible, that does free up. We have on average about 200 seniors that graduate every year from our school. We average about 100 to 114 internships. In addition to that, with those 200, they've taken, I think our average is about 16 credits of college that's under their belt as an average. Also, we have In 3 years of starting this, we went from zero pathway completers to 56 pathway completers a year. And don't quote me on this one, I want to say it's 23 that were multiple pathway completers. We have industry credential earners at high numbers now because they are actually going to MTech or MATC, MTech in Spanish Fork. They drive up every day because they've got all their academic classes and curriculum out of the way, and they do it as a senior at $5 a credit versus $2,000 for the course as a post-high graduate. But they can do it as their senior year, and those lead to industry credentials.
So if I could plug an event, on May 9th, I think it starts at 6, we'd invite you all to come out to Centennial Junior High. We're going to host, we're hosting the panel conversation with, we'll have our school leaders in attendance, but on the panel will be the Vice President of Education for Microsoft, Iran, and I can't pronounce his last name, even let alone remember it. But also Aaron Sconard from Pluralsight, the CEO. We have a vice president from Market Star that'll be in attendance in addition to our superintendent. So we want to put our school leaders in a room with these individuals and talk about how personalization meets the needs of businesses in our community. But you'd be welcome to attend. I could send you an email with that.
Send it to me, I'll send it to everyone.
Okay, Board Member Gravitt.
I just want to thank you guys for coming and kind of broadening my view and my definition of competency-based learning. Like I feel relieved to hear about the whole child. I feel relieved when, Nick, you talked about that blended is best, and it's not just online learning, because I think sometimes there is that misconception that they're just out in the park on their own, which a park is nice, and I like that, but you always need a teacher because there's a power of the teacher. So, and I appreciate you innovating in spite of challenges of class size and challenges of traditional model, and it's just so fun to hear about what you guys are doing. Just quickly, and it's probably because I'm an English teacher, I'm thinking about all the standards, and Nick, you talked about like your son completing in 2 terms. And some of you talked about maybe using a portfolio. How did he complete it? Like, what did you use as the measure for 2 terms of English language arts? Could you talk about that?
Sure. So it comes down to, I wish I had a ton of time. I'm sorry.
I know, and I can talk to you later about it,
Yeah.
but I just am so curious.
Just it comes down to the teachers having all their standards on and the assignments that fit those standards on Canvas.
Okay.
And as a student moves through on the learning management system, it doesn't have to be Canvas, but at our school it was. As a student moves through, they demonstrate competency and they can keep moving, right? And in my student's example, several of those novels that you would read in 10th grade, he had already read during the summer previous.
Okay.
And so, To Kill a Mockingbird, because his dad is who he is, I was also an English teacher.
Yeah.
And we read To Kill a Mockingbird as a family. And so when
Nice.
he was able to demonstrate competency and understanding, and so.
Oh, thanks. That helps me understand.
Okay. Board Member Davis.
I just wanted to note, I was able to go during this exploratory grant time to several of these locations nationally to see what does this look like in different places. And I think those folks who are worried about losing that community culture and classroom time and things like that, I'm telling you, everywhere I went, that was alive and well. The kids were still in their classrooms. They were still with teachers. What was different was the mindset of the educators, and they were on fire. I mean, they were so open to different ways to help students reach a variety of needs and levels. That was what was different. And when you look at, for example, your question on deadlines and things like that and timelines, in Wisconsin, lots of open timelines. It worked for them. In Lindsay Unified School District in California, they said, we tried that for a year or 2, did not work for us. They went back to some deadlines on assignments. So it's going to look different in different communities. It'll look differently. The second thing, I also wanted to know, I asked at one of the districts, I thought, I hear so often that computers are going to replace teachers. So in one of the key districts in Lindsay Unified, I interviewed several elementary students and several high school students. And the elementary school students said, we are on a computer. On average, it was less than 30 minutes a day. The high school students were 1 to 1.5 hours a day
on average, which is so much less than I would have anticipated going into this. They certainly are blended learning models, but the teachers are still key components in all of this. And then the second thing I'm learning to appreciate about this is that it's bottom innovated, top supported. And I started on this advisory board. I don't know if you remember, Sarah, but I was a little cranky when I started a few years ago. And I came in and I was the one that asked for the survey to be done at our local LEAs. Because I said, I'm hearing our politicians talk about this. And I don't want one more thing being thrown down on schools by our politicians. And I said, I want to know if there's really buy-in at the ground level. And so we did this survey, and I was so excited when 80% came back and said, we're actually really interested in this, and we want to learn, and we want to know, and we want to innovate. So the whole process of having these pilot programs and just a framework being created by our charters and our districts and who are exploring in this area has been so exciting to me, and yet still having support from our state level folks, whether the legislature or here, I think is like the best of both worlds. And then finally, 4 years ago, I work at Utah Valley University. I was actually on the first year advisory board for CBE, for competency-based education at Utah Valley University, where we were bringing in national experts for alternate transcripts and things like that. So they're looking at someday, how do we get a transcript where it's a portfolio where you click on what students can do instead of seeing a two-dimensional A, B, C, D grade. So this is happening everywhere on multiple levels. And again, I love it. It's not something that's going to be forced down anyone's throat. I love that it's a choice. I love that these folks are so honest, and having watched them the last few years of being, this works, this doesn't, what works for us might not work for you. That's the beauty of that also. So I'm pretty excited about it.
I can tell you are. We're going to almost end on this right here. Real quick, before we wrap this up, Superintendent, I'm hoping it's okay if we have a process for board members that have questions, and all the board members can benefit from these questions. Should we kind of route that through you or to Sarah or whatever? Because while this is fresh, and I know people took a lot of notes, where could they ask the question? How do you want the questions routed?
Two things.
Oh, sorry.
So I think if we could maybe create a list of places for you to visit to visualize it would be helpful. I know what I brag about all the time are the places that I've seen this in place, so that might be helpful. And then second, I would say route your questions probably to Todd as our digital teaching and learning coordinator, or Sarah, either one, but either one of them can get with you. And Sarah started this, has been the face of it, but I want to acknowledge that Todd has moved in as our digital teaching and learning coordinator and is up to speed on leading out on all of this. So if you all, gentlemen, wouldn't mind maybe funneling through Todd a list of places that you would like him to see. I've been in your spaces and have seen them, and I can add to that, but I think if there are places you want to highlight, and then Sarah and Todd create that list, we'll push it out to the board. So a push out and a go forward to the two of them.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. Sarah, you had a conclusion?
Yeah, the last thing we would say to kind of bring things back together and conclude, first of all, is thank you to our local leaders that came and told their story and helped in sharing their expertise, and also to the board for giving us the opportunity to be part of this conversation, and all of your insightful and thoughtful questions and the conversation we were able to have. In the beginning today, we talked about personalized learning and discussed one of the definitions of personalized learning and made a connection to one of the 4 strategic plan goals specifically around personalized teaching and learning. Hopefully through this discussion over the last couple of hours, we all have a better understanding of how these efforts around competency are truly helping support and inform efforts of this larger vision around personalized teaching and learning. Specifically, you may be very familiar, I'm sure you are, with the 4 strategies that fall underneath this goal of personalized teaching and learning. And we see specifically in strategy D, which promotes new school system models for personalized learning implementation, we see competency being a very important part of that specific strategy. And we're excited to continue to learn from these local leaders and to listen to them and help provide the support they need as we all go forward to try to accomplish this very important goal around personalized learning. So thank you.
Thanks again for being here. The other day I heard from an educator, and I can't wait to get a copy of this article, and it had something to do with a bicycle. And back when the bicycle first came out, and a few of them were around, and then it got to the point that it was really made for adults. And then somebody decided, well, let's make them a little smaller for children. And as they were manufacturing these, going out, now this goes way beyond, I mean, I don't think there's anyone, I don't want to ask the question if anyone is around, but the bicycle came out. But there was a serious campaign that went out that talked about how the bicycle was going to ruin the family and ruin kids. That the bicycle is going to, the kids are going to get on their bike and they're going to ride off and they're never going to come back. And parents are going to lose control of their kids. And it went on, which I just can't wait to get the article. I want to get it and share it with board members. That kind of reinforces a little bit about what happens with change and innovation. And I don't know if kids have bikes anymore. I tried to get my grandkids into it, but so thank you for being here. Our time is gone, and there's a lot of work in this, and I'm looking forward to these questions and more while this is fresh on our minds. So board members, please participate more in this dialogue, and if as it circulates back to us, we'll all have a better understanding of what right looks like. So thanks again. Okay, so we are done with this piece. We're late for our next, which we know how to survive. So we'll take a 10-minute break while we get set up, and we'll get ready for our next meeting.